And we are live. Good evening, everyone. I hope you are well, that you have a nice beginning of the week, and welcome for a new interview with a member of the European Parliament. This one, it's a bit of a special one, I have to say, because if you followed a bit the stream yesterday, you know that we were supposed to have another MEP, the MEP Council, so I had to struggle a bit. And Mr. Nienass, so our guest of tonight, was kind enough to come on the channel pretty much at the last moment, so I'll be extra grateful to him for coming over to tonight and be with us. So, like I mentioned, tonight we'll be discussing with German MEP Niklas Nienass for the political group of the Greens. So he's on the left side of EU politics. He's 29 years old, so he's young. Not the youngest MEP we've had on the show, but almost. So he's been an MEP since 2019. He's a member of the Committee on Regional Development, the Committee on Culture and Education, and he's a substitute in the Committee on Constitutional Affairs. And no, cult doesn't mean that he's a cultist. That's another thing. But before we start our conversation, as usual, I remind the house rules for anyone new with us tonight. So I guess will be with us for about an hour. After that, you will be able to go and enjoy his evening in Strasbourg, I imagine. Well, I'll keep streaming for half an hour to discuss with you all about what you thought about the interview, my own interpretation of things, and maybe provide any additional explanations if needed. As usual, I've prepared my own question for Mr. Nienass, and I collected questions from you guys on Reddit, Discord, and all the good things. As always, you can ask your own questions via the chat. I will keep an eye on it, and I will pick among your suggestions. But as usual, feel free to participate, to react. It's open, but don't spam and stay civil. The goal of this interview, as you know, is for you to better understand what MEPs are doing in the European Parliament. In this case, who is Mr. Nienass? What are his priorities? What are his opinions about the EU in general? Some political questions, maybe. He is a Green. We try to invite a variety of MEPs. We had ECR, we had IPP, we had Greens, we had everything pretty much. So for you, the goal is to observe this diversity and to forge your own opinion. We will not go too deep into policy discussions to avoid losing everyone, including myself. And we will not touch on national politics unless it is relevant to EU politics. So keep that in mind when asking your own questions. So without further ado, well, let's do this. So good evening and welcome to you, Mr. Niklas Nienass. Thank you again for being with us tonight, especially under the circumstances, especially since you are in Strasbourg this week. It's very busy, as you know, in plenary. You heard me explain it to the viewers. The goal of tonight is to put faces on the European Union and to help them understand better what's happening in Brussels or in Strasbourg for this week. And tonight we will get to know you better and what you stand for in the European Parliament. So, Per, to start off our discussion, could you briefly introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll pick up from there?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Niklas Nienass. I'm a member of the European Parliament since 2019, as the MEP assistant already told you. I'm actually 29 years old, so as I heard, the second youngest to be interviewed here and one of the youngest members of Parliament. And I'm working in regional development policy, so this is cohesion for all over Europe, that we ensure that Europe can really grow together as one, that you have the same possibilities and chances wherever you were born and grow up. I'm doing cults, so not a cultist as already mentioned, but culture and education is in that committee. And for that, I'm working that we have freedom of the arts and freedom of culture, because it is under threat currently by the pandemic, but also by some, more nationalistic governments that we have throughout Europe. And thirdly, I'm also doing space policy, because it's a very important future field. And I'm also a member of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is also a thing in which 108 members of the parliament are part of.
All right. A few things I didn't know. I didn't know you were part of the Conference on Future of Europe, so I'm sure we can discuss that a bit later. But further, let's go back a bit in time. Could you tell us a bit how and why you got into politics in the first place, and later you became an MEP? What's your story?
So I started in my hometown, and I started by going to the Young Greens because I was just interested in it, and then we started by doing quite a lot of cultural stuff actually. So we organized concerts and did something for the scene as well as for young people to improve living in the city, just because I think it's important that everybody does something. And so that was interesting. You got in more discussions, and then I ended up doing more and more politics because I just found it very very interesting, and it was nice to see that if you're committed to something that can change and can have an impact, like with organizing stuff, but also with changing the policy in your area. And so then I became interested, especially in the international and European policies. And in our party structure, it is possible that you very easily can join the working groups, the party working groups that are dealing with the topics. And so I did that, and I was interested in got a little bit more around it. And then in 2017, I believe, I decided that I will be running for the European Parliament because I was interested in the topic. I was educated in the topic. I also were part of a lot of discussions in the party line for the questions of Europe and how to improve the European situation. And then I ran for the list. So we have a list system where we vote for one list throughout Germany. And there I was elected on the list in 2018, and then I was elected in the parliament in 2019.
All right. So, like I mentioned, you're 29, so you're among the youngest MEPs in the European Parliament. I mean, there's a number of assistants who are actually older than you, so that must be a kind of an odd experience when you arrive in the Parliament, which is usually you see older people, usually older men being MEPs. How were you perceived and treated in the Parliament when you first arrived? Did your colleagues look at you weird because you were young, or were you treated more or less like any other MEP and it was business as usual?
I wouldn't say as any other MEP. However, I also would say that they were treating me with respect. So it's not like they were disrespectful just because I'm younger. But of course, I also had to show off that I know what I'm talking about, that I know the topic, especially in the beginning, I'm coordinator for the regional development policy, and so that was of course a time where I had to show my coordinator colleagues that I know the field, even though I'm fresh in politics or fresh in the European Parliament. And once that was done, there's a very good collegious spirit of mutual respect.
All right, interesting. And in this new parliament, we're already half mandate. I keep forgetting because of COVID. There was a lot of new MEPs, 60% new MEPs in this current mandate, and a lot of more than usual younger MPs in the mandate across the political spectrum, not only in the Greens but beyond. Do you think these younger MEPs, including yourself, you bring something new into EU politics, or is it more or less the same because politics is politics whether you're young or old?
No, I think we bring something very substantial into this very parliament, because there's actually a group called Young Europeans, because it is mainly made of younger parliamentarians across party lines, and we were not talking about policy issues, but about the politics, how we are working as a parliament. So we all joined in the cause that we say, okay, the way that we discuss in the parliament is very, very boring. It's not a real debate that's happening there. It's really too boring to watch. And so we need to change it. We need to have a more vibrant and interesting debate so that people actually want to see and want to watch it and want to be part of the discussion. And so that this parliament really becomes the place for European democracy and the heart of the European debate. But for that, we need to change quite a lot of stuff. And so we demanded that from the parliament's president, and he listened to us. So he organized several working groups in which we changed or we discussed how to improve working methods Also now with digitalization, how we can improve on that, how we can improve the committee discussions and also the plenary discussion and so on. So there was a lot of discussion. Nothing yet has changed. I mean, that's also something that I think you have to learn, that it takes a long time, but it looks like there's changes. And also I talked to that with Terry, for example, a colleague of mine, Terry Ranke, who also was a very young member when she's still a very young member, but when she joined Parliament last minute, she was even younger, of course. And she also said that she was annoyed by this, but she couldn't change anything because nobody of the old guys would listen to her if she was demanding changes. But now this time, because there's so many young people, we just have, a better possibility to change things up. And I also think that with the new members, with the big number of new members in general, I think a lot of them are also, even though they might not be completely young or under 30 or anything, but they still want to see different style of debate than what we're having at the moment.
I actually that's something you brought something that I wanted to cover towards the end of the stream, but let's do it now. You said that EU politics is at the moment too boring to watch, and you said that you worked on ways to improve it. Can you tell us a bit about what you proposed in terms of improvements?
Yeah, well, the very first thing, no, I think the two first things that we said was everybody should sit in the front when we're having a debate. Now I'm talking about the debate in the plenary, so in the hammer cycle. So everybody should sit in the front, so that it's not like a big open, empty room, but rather, at least the people that are discussing. It's not everybody present. That's not possible because we have to work aside from that. But at least those who are present are in the front. They're talking with each other, and you have short ways to discuss even besides the official discussion. You can still go to your colleagues and say, hey, what you said, I don't disagree, or yes, I like that argument, or whatever. We tried it out, it worked. So when we tried it out in one debate, we were sitting all in front, and we were having quite the interesting debate amongst ourselves. But it's already something more interesting, because we also had one debate in which the journalists saw this blob of MEPs. They were all sitting together, and they had something to show in the camera, because you don't want to show a debate where just one person is sitting in an empty room and then over there is sitting another person. That's because the room is too big, because everybody has a seat there. That was the first thing. The second thing was the podium. There's a podium in the middle of the parliament, but prior to COVID, nobody was allowed to use it. It was only for the speech of von der Leyen or some guests or anything. And if you presented your speech, you were doing it from your own desk, which doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, it's bad for the discussion, but it's also, the reason why we have a circular plenary is because in a circle, one person can stand in the middle and everybody can see him. And you can talk to everybody the same way, and you can have a discussion with a lot of people at the same time. Whereas when you're standing at your desk, it doesn't make any sense. Some people have to turn around. Some people will only see the back of the person. I don't even know why they started it. And so now we're having at least this, because thanks to COVID, because for some health reasons, I did not understand it, but now we're having it and we're happy with it. And the third thing is an actual debate during the debate, because at the moment it's more like you present your speech and then you go. You talk 1 minute and then you go. And that's really boring. But what we wanted to introduce, and there is the possibility, it's called blue cards. You can raise a blue card, and then you are allowed to ask a question, and the person can answer then the question. And I think, that it is at least somewhat of a debate. And we did it also before the pandemic. Now, because of the pandemic, it's not possible to use blue cards anymore, because some people are remotely joining, and so they couldn't use the blue cards. It's a little bit annoying, but we want to use it more in the future, that you have always the possibility to ask questions or give an extra statement, that you really have a debate going on, and that there's more spontaneous answers, and something interesting to watch, that not everything is planned and rehearsed, but really something special can happen, and then people are like, oh, did he just say that, or whatever.
And I had a question from someone ready to on the same more or less theme, was asking, why is you so bad at communicating anything? Why do we suck at communicating?
I don't know. If I would have had the answer to that, I would have changed it so long time ago. I mean, of course, it's more difficult to discuss in various different languages because it just takes more time. Because when somebody's telling a joke, for example,
Yep.
Everybody hears the joke later, and so that you'll see a wave of laughs because the translation comes here and there, and some won't get the joke because the translation doesn't work. So it is, of course, more difficult, and that's also true for arguments and everything else. But I think that's not the reason, because we can also still discuss. And I'm having so many very interesting discussions on committee level, on the hallways here. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. It's just that, somehow it's not. We don't manage to take it outside. And I think it is also, it's a lot of different factors. It's also maybe about the topic that we discuss a lot of issues where we don't have the competences. So, for example, when we're talking about foreign affairs, it often happens that the parliament has a resolution, they debated, or we debated, we decide on the resolution as very substantive point for whatever. And then because we don't have the competence, the council does something different. They don't have to follow our resolution. They just do something completely different. And then it's like, oh, well, okay, so the parliament's opinion didn't really matter. And because we're having so many debates about stuff where we don't have to decide, I think that then journalists are like, why should we talk about or tell about this, make a story about the discussion in parliament if it's an irrelevant discussion, because the council does what they want anyway, right? So this barely happens, and if we continue to do that, then of course nobody will show stories from European Parliament. Whereas if you talk about something where we can decide, like the MFF, like different programs that we're working on, for example, the what is it? The financial regulations or the trade agreements or anything like that, where we have substantial competences. That's interesting for journalists to talk about. And they do that, but we need to focus also in Parliament on where we have competence and focus that first. And so journalists really can follow and want to follow our discussions as well.
Okay, interesting. Let's go back to what you actually work on in terms of substance. So you already mentioned that you're a member of the Regi committee, so the committee in charge of the regional funds. Can you tell us briefly, more precisely, what is your focus in this? Because regional funds, it's quite wide as a topic.
Yeah, well, sorry, but as I mentioned earlier, I think it's very important that we make sure that everybody in Europe has the same opportunities, and for that we need to have the so-called cohesion throughout Europe to ensure that we have a cohesive Europe. And for that, I'm focusing, on the cohesion policy is doing it quite well, or at least it can help to stop the spread, because what we're currently seeing in Europe, especially throughout different crises, are that the richer nations get richer and the richer regions, and the poor regions get poorer. And the cohesion policy at the moment, because it's underfunded, at least ensures that they don't drift apart too much. But what we want to do is actually to bring them on the same level, at least somewhat. And for that, we're also trying to improve the way how we fund, how we give opportunities to people, and then also to use the funding to ensure that certain projects are being done. For example, with the energy transition, Poland, for example, doesn't want to turn off the coal mines, but we give them an alternative and give them, here's funding to do that with the JTF, which is one of the funds. Here's the possibility to help you get over the transition, but at the same time, fulfilling on the climate targets that we as a union have. So I think that's a very important step there. And the part that where I'm focused on mainly is the question of rural areas, because I think that we have for too long we didn't do enough to help rural areas develop more, and so that's what I'm focused on. And the other thing is the question of citizens' participation, because what we currently do a lot is basically we give a lot of money to member states, and then, as most of you probably know, especially in Hungary, but also in the Czech Republic with Babiš, and also in Poland, they misuse these funds. Poland not so much, by the way, but they misuse these funds to fund their own campaigns. They use it for bribery and for corruption. It's not only those member states, also happening in other member states. And so you either, and where you don't have that, you still have big projects where you support only big companies to make big things happening that are not substantial. And I believe that if we include the people who are living in the regions more in the question of how to develop their own region, we will have more substantial results. We will have results that benefit more people, because it's not only big projects for big players, but it's medium-sized projects for medium-sized enterprises and small-sized enterprises. And we will create therefore more jobs, more opportunities on the long term and on a sustainable level, because a small bakery will always try to continue to have their jobs and their income, whereas a big company will probably, after they got support for 10 years and then the funding runs out, they can also say, let's go to the next place where we can have cheap opportunities, anything. So it's not substantial. And the last thing, these citizens' participation also ensures that there's not so much or at least or almost none bribery or corruption in it. And so this is something that I'm working on to ensure that there's more democracy with funds, with funding.
Let's go back a bit. So first, you mentioned the Just Transition Fund, one of the funds you worked on, which is the fund that is aimed at helping regions to do their green transition, so to say. You mentioned the example of Poland, and to try to unhook them from coal. Concretely, what's beyond Poland? What kind of region are we talking about? What kind of region are eligible for these kind of funds, and what does it fund concretely? What is the money for?
So the Just Transition Fund?
Yeah, this fund.
So the Just Transition Fund is it was designed originally to help those regions that are dependent on fossil fuels, on burning of fossil fuels, to produce wealth and in the end jobs and everything, to help them with the transition, to ensure to create new jobs, but also to keep structures. So if a lot of people lose their job, then the city might not have the tax income to, for example, pay for a school or for a swimming hall or anything, and then it's less attractive to live in these regions, and so they will die out. And that's the fear, that if we close all the coal mines from one day to the other, that then all the region throughout, the people that are working not maybe in the coal mine, but in the sports area or in the swim hall, that they will also lose their job. And so we have this Just Transition Fund to help those regions in general to keep jobs, to keep the people, to continue to be healthy and live and vibrant. And then the council said, we want money for everybody. And so they changed it a little bit in a way that only the Commission can do. And now we have a distribution so that every country profits in some mysterious ways. For example, even France, even though France doesn't really have any coal plant or anything that would qualify. So they added a region that where an oil pipeline comes in. And they somehow said that this is also eligible. So it's a little bit watered down, but at least everybody profits. The main profiteers are Germany, actually, because we have a lot of coal power plants, and Poland, but also, I believe, the Czech Republic, then Romania and Bulgaria, and even Spain and Greece. And So there's a big variety of regions that profit from it, but it's not going to the member states themselves just, but to very specific regions. So they have a so-called NUTS 2 level, which means that it is basically the size of a few villages.
Okay.
So it's not of a big region, but a really small region, and they have like 108 regions throughout Europe identified from the Commission who are eligible for this funding, and they get the money, and then they can do stuff with it. And it's quite a lot of money, and they're also eligible for additional support from the European Investment Bank.
All right, that's interesting. So it's very, very targeted in India still because of the categorization of like small areas.
It's targeted, but the question is still what they do with the funding, that's where we try to ensure that they support sustainable future jobs, that they don't invest like for 2 years in or like what a lot of people want to do, what I don't understand, but it's not possible, thankfully. What they wanted to change from coal to gas, because they think that gas is a little bit less worse than coal, so it's better than coal. But I said, if we change now, like let's say in 2025, because until funding is coming and until you really build it, so in 2025 you change from coal to gas, then you can use it for 10 years, and then you have to change again because we want to be climate neutral, which means also no gas, and so you have to change again. So after 10 years, all those jobs are gone again, and you have to redo the transformation and everything. And so this is really a stupid idea. So we really had to control that they don't use it for completely stupid projects. They're still using it for a stupid project because they have to spend a lot of money in a very short time. And then they tend to do like, okay, let's take all this money and put it over there and ensure that, I don't know, something happens with it. Let's build a stadium or anything, even though there's nobody. But we hope that we eliminated the main route for that.
All right. You mentioned a bit the misuse of EU funds, of cohesion funds, and one of the debates that is related to the regional funds, an idea was made that a debate was made on whether the EU should cut at least partly the regional funds for countries that do not respect, for instance, the rule of law, or regions that adopted LGBT-free zone resolution. So here I'm speaking about mostly Poland. Do you think that this kind of that cutting the funds for these regions of this country is appropriate, or do you think that it is a politicization of funds that are supposed to benefit to the people on the ground?
Yeah, that's exactly the problem with this debate. So it is a viable method, and it is an effective tool in order to ensure that they fall back in line with the basis of our democratic understanding. And I think we need tools like that to ensure that, to have sanctions for member states who are violating our treaties and who are violating our basis of values. However, and here's the other problematic part. So I know a lot of people who are in Poland and who are in the opposition or who are supporting LGBTQI movements, and they want to do stuff with it, but they don't get funding for it. Because the Polish government, for example, in cultural funding, they say if you don't support God, the state, or the nation, you don't get funding at all. If you want to do anything with refugees or with gay people, you don't get funding for your project. So the only funding, and it's also different other programs, but the only funding that they rely on is European funding. So if we cut the European funding for those regions, it means in the end we are effectively hurting those the most that we actually want to support. Right? We were trying to help those people who are fighting for LGBTI rights, or who are fighting for the rule of law and everything, and we're cutting funding to them. So what we need to do instead is not to cut the funding completely, but to cut the direct the shared management. That's what it's called. So basically what we're doing is Brussels gives a lot of money to the member states, to the capital, and then the government can decide how to spend it. They have to spend it in all regions. We have all these rules in place that everybody can participate, that everybody has the same possibilities. And with the European funds, they also do it. However, if we make it possible that they don't get funding for the European for the member states themselves, we take away a lot of leverage for them, because of course they can still target, more this or more that. They can still help friends more out or ensure that their voters get more of it, anything. If we cut this tie, they can't use it to their benefit anymore, and then we take it and make a direct funding or a direct management, which means that we either give directly to the region itself, for example, Budapest or Warsaw or Szczecin, that they get the direct funding, so that they can do projects in their city with the money, or we make it with direct management, which then means that the Commission is looking at the projects which apply for it, and then are giving funding towards the people who want to start a project. And that, I think, would be the best solution, because then, for example, if you have like a country or a region that calls itself LGBTQI free zone, then they would stop receiving funding, and instead the European Commission can then direct the funding exactly to organizations like Lambda in Poland, who are helping LGBTQI people, who are offering support for them. So we are targeting even more the people that need the support and can strengthen them.
Okay, so to sum up, the way to go would be, instead of completely cutting the fund, it would be to circumvent, to go around the government and give the money directly to the people who are supposed to benefit from it. That way, the people who are supposed to get the money, but the government cannot misuse it. Okay.
Exactly. So we are hurting those people who we want to hurt, and that's the government, and not that people.
And generally speaking, on the global idea, the global debate on the misuse of funds, so not related to rule of law or that kind of stuff, but generally the misuse of fund corruption, how is the EU acting to prevent that, to fight against this such misuse?
Yeah, we have quite a lot of rules about that, and that's getting also problematic. But I'll come to that later. First of all, we have a new how do you call it? Well, they're looking for. We have a new institution that is looking into the misuse of funds, and they can actually then prosecute. So we have a European prosecution office that then can prosecute those people who are misusing funds, and I think that's a great tendency, because it also gives the European Union more power to really directly go into the situation, and don't have to wait for member states to prosecute, because if they're part of the corruption, then of course they won't prosecute. And it's not yet mandatory, so it's not perfect yet, but I think it's a good tendency. We also have a lot of rules that are designed to lower the possibilities to misuse fund or also for corruption, but this also creates a lot of bureaucracy, and that is also then a problem, because with more bureaucracy, the smaller companies, as well as single persons or recipients who want to do something with funding, they have a very hard time to apply for it. So it's getting very problematic for them, and so we need to reduce bureaucracy for them, because otherwise only the big companies have the possibility to get funding. Mm-hmm. And that's then a little bit problematic. But I believe that especially if we're talking about smaller sums, I believe that we don't need so many rules, because if you think about it, around 1 to 3%, even the Court of Auditors are thinking that around up to 2.5%, I believe, of funding will always go missing. Mm-hmm. Can be corruption, can be wrong calculated, anything that just happens. And if you think about 1 or 2% of 5,000 euro funding, that's like 10 euros. Okay, maybe a wrong thing here, or a burger too much on wrong cost. I'm fine with that if 10 euros are misused. But if you have a project where you have like 10 million euros, 2% of that is a lot of money. And that should not be misused. With that sum, it actually is interesting for people to use it for corruption and everything. And so there we need to look closer into. But for the smaller parts, I think we can make it easier for people to access funding.
So in here, it's the what is at stake is like to do the controls on where there is the most risks in terms of amounts and also in terms of societal risk, and leave aside like the to say the smallest projects because it's the arm is probably less important. It's about focusing the resources. Okay,
and it's just annoying everybody. Like a lot of people who are just wanting to do a little project. They want 5,000 euros or let it be 10,000 euros for their project, and they have to do so much paperwork. It's just not worth it for them. So a lot of people actually tend to say, fuck it, I'm not doing the project at all if it's so hard to get the funding for it. And so I think to help them, it would be better to have less bureaucracy, at least for the smaller one.
And actually, I mean, I don't know if you had your answer, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Do we have an idea of who are the beneficiaries? Who are the people who apply for EU funds? Is it more big companies, or do we have a bit of a mix of also small people? Or like you mentioned, is it like small companies, individual people are it's too much bureaucracy for them, so they say, oh no, I don't want to try to get EU funds, too complicated.
So there's a big variety of different funding programs because we have 700 pages of just what you can do with the funding, and then we give all that to the member states, and they make the programs specific for their region. So you have different regions, different projects. So I couldn't even, if you'd ask me which program you could apply for, I don't know, because it depends on where you live currently and where your project is located. And in these different projects, there's a lot for bigger projects, there's a lot for small and medium projects, and there's a lot for smaller projects. That's fine. We have agreed on how much should go where, and the focus is actually on medium and small enterprises, but of the number of applicants, but the sum in the end is more of bigger programs, which is all right. However, if you look at the realization of the projects, so basically you have like 1 million for small enterprises, 1 million for medium enterprises, and 1 million for big enterprises. The 1 million for big enterprises are almost always gone completely. They use it because they have the possibility to apply for it. They have it very easy to manage it. The medium-sized have more difficulties with it. They get support a lot of times from states. They sometimes have lawyers in house, or they ask lawyers to help them. And the smaller ones, they have the biggest problems, and they are also the biggest amount of non-used funds. And so this shows that we are doing a wrong job, or we're leaving the smaller ones outside.
All right, interesting. Let's move away from Reggie and dive into your other main committee, the culture committee. So when I was looking at your profile, I saw that you worked on the Creative Europe program, so the main new funding for cultural projects, which we know a bit on the channel because I play games that were co-financed by Creative Europe, so people are a bit aware of what Creative Europe is. But can you tell us a bit more about the program overall, apart from funding video games? What does it do?
It is the one and only and biggest at the same time funding opportunity from the European side for cultural activities. But those cultural activities always have to have a European component in it. So it means that you have, for example, a project where you have cross-border cooperation of artists, that you have at least 3 different countries being involved in it, so co-production and everything. What they also do is a lot of translating with subtitles, for example, so that we ensure that everybody can understand videos or movies or books that were written in different languages, even though it might not be, for example, if you produce a book in Germany and you want to, it's a good book, but you want to bring it to Lithuania, but Lithuania is just a very small market, so it doesn't really, from a just economical standpoint, doesn't make sense to translate it. But still, we want the Lithuanians to have the possibility to read it and be part of the discussion. Then there's the funding to do that. And so it's really everything that has to do with culture and to promote the European exchange. And there's a lot of programs and projects being being done by that in every field actually. So it's from art, so painting, to theater, movies. We have the Lux Film Prize. Then we have video games, as you mentioned. We have what is it called?
Fashion?
I don't know the fashion. Yeah, thank you. Fashion. So there's really everything that you can think of that is in the cultural field. Also, the support for cultural heritage is in there and is being supported.
And do you consider that? Are you satisfied with the program, or do you think that more could be done? I mean, it's kind of a irony because the culture education is historically speaking something where the EU does not have a lot of competencies, but some of the most popular EU policies are related to that. I'm thinking, of course, about Erasmus, where we all watch European movies, games, etc., etc. But at the moment, are you satisfied with what Creative Europe is, or what improvement would you make?
Yeah, and the European Song Contest, right? That's also somewhat part of it. But yeah, I'm satisfied with the program. The program is great. I think that we need additional support for creatives who don't want to do the European dimension of it. As I mentioned, you have to have 3 partners from 3 different countries at least, at the minimum. And earlier I said that for example, people from Poland, they don't get support for cultural funding because they don't follow the rules of state, nation, or God in their productions. And they cannot apply for the big production with Creative Europe because it's difficult for them. So there's a lot of times that they get support from other companies who already have the program running. And then there's like, we pick you up so that you get some funding that you can then also do other productions in your region. And I think that's problematic because if we want to ensure that everybody has free access to culture, we also need to ensure that the opposition opinion can be funded in every member state. So I think that should be an additional factor, but of course that's not covered of the competences of the EU currently. And other than that, I'm very happy with the program as it stands, except for the budget. I mean, we increased the budget already quite substantially, but in the last funding period, they had to deny 80% of the people who applied for it. Not because it weren't good ideas. It was, actually what they do before that. Before people even apply, they sort out the bad ideas. So they tell them, better not apply with that, try for other funding. And those who apply have everything that you need to be funded. But still 80% of the project had to be declined simply because we didn't have the funding for it. So we have way more applications than we have funding. And now I believe we will still end up with like 70% of, even though we increased it by like 3 times, I believe, we tripled the funding. And still, I believe we will have around 60 to 70 people applications denied just because of lack of funding.
And out of curiosity, how much money are we talking about in Creative Europe?
I think 1 extra billion. I'm not quite sure. I will look. I can look it up.
Well, otherwise I'll check it up. But
yeah. that's also something interesting that I never thought about. When we are designing the whole program, we're really doing the design thing of how it should work. The budget is being decided by the budget committee and by the council, and so that I found very surprising because it's hard to calculate if you don't know how much money you have.
Oh yeah, so basically you make the rules without knowing how much money you'll have in the bank for to apply these rules.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's kind of what I need. Moving away from Creative Europe, but still related to culture.
The number is
okay.
The number is 2.5 billion in 2018 numbers, and it used to be 1.4.
Okay, yeah. So
in 2018 numbers,
not a big budget.
No,
definitely not.
No, it's tiny in comparison with the 2 trillion euros that we have for the whole budget. It's like 0.1%.
Indeed, I think there are margin of progress for going from 0.1%. Still on culture, you mentioned in the introduction that the freedom of the arts was in danger in Europe, partly because of COVID and partly because of other reasons. So let's start by COVID. Can you tell us a bit about the impact that COVID had on culture in Europe?
Yeah. Do you remember the last time you were in the movie theater or
Movie theater,
in the
yes.
theater? In the theater?
No,
In a
theaterness.
museum? In a club? In anything that was related to culture? And now, okay, for the last and especially in France, uh, in Germany, it's getting worse and worse with the numbers for COVID. And in the last half year, it got better, especially with the pass sanitaire and everything that was done, and the new vaccinations. But before that, there was over a year, I think a year and a half, where all those people couldn't earn any money because all their gigs, all their projects were simply cancelled without knowing when they will continue. And as well, a lot of people in the artistic sector are also, because they cannot survive just because of their art, a lot of them are co-working in as a waiter. And that was also closed. So they didn't have any income. And so there were a lot of people who did not know for how long they will not get any income, and also they didn't get any support from their member states. So they weren't because they're self-employed. They didn't even get the unemployment
benefit, yeah.
It was just like, no, you didn't have a job, so it's your fault. And they were really screwed. And a lot of artists sold their instruments or their tools, even though they needed to make their art and make a living, just to pass by and just to ensure that they have something to put on the table at the end of the month. They didn't have any clarity. So it broke them. It completely broke them and completely threatened our culture and cultural field. And you have some member states like France, like Germany, but also Austria and many others as well. They have a certain security system. And they also knew that something bad is going on, and they tried to help. It didn't work out completely well, especially in the beginning. They didn't do too much to help them. It's completely different also from region to region. But those were the good cases. The bad cases are, now let's imagine you're an autocrat who dislikes the fact that you have creatives in your country who criticize what you do. And now suddenly there comes an epidemic and all of them are out of work. What are you going to do except for nothing and waiting that they all starve and have to stop doing their work and have to stop criticizing you? I mean, there were a lot of autocrats in the European Union that just used this pandemic for their benefit by not supporting artists. And this is effectively also destroying artistic freedom. And if you're actively doing something to destroy the freedom of expression and freedom of the arts, there's the European Court of Justice, but they're just passively not doing anything to help them. And so there's no possibility to take them in accountants. And that's what happened during COVID quite a lot of times.
And what could the EU do anything about that? Apart from looking at the problem?
Yeah, well, so officially not, because we don't have the competences. So our first idea was to include a clause in the RRF and the Recovery and Resilience Facility that includes 2% of spending has to go into the culture and creative sector. That would mean that the member states are forced to use the funding to support their creative sectors. That would at least help something, and it would have also been the biggest single investment into arts and culture ever in the European Union. However, the member states didn't like it, of course, and so they voted it out. Now we're actively thinking, the situation is getting a little bit better. There was also a little bit of cross-border help, I have to say. And now we're thinking of how can we ensure that it will never happen, that something like this will never happen again. And for that, it's clear that the European Union must be the guarantee for everybody that arts and culture are free throughout Europe, and the diversity of culture is free in Europe. And for that, I think we need a social safety net that ensures that even if you're out of work, you still get some income, that if you're in pension, you get some income from the work you did. We have ideas like there are some projects in, as I mentioned, France, Belgium, Germany, Austria. They're not good enough completely, but we could start with that. And also, we have member states where nothing like this exists, so we need to introduce it there as well. And then there's the idea, as I mentioned, the cultural fund, even for opposition candidates, so that you have opposition funding in the member states, so that you can be funded even without the European cross-border component in it, and still have your projects, because then you are really free from the state and the economic influence. Because not everything that is art is also a blockbuster from Hollywood, and has a lot of rewards of it. But it's still important to drive the ideas and the discussions. And so I think those are the two main, most important issues that we need to ensure in order to guarantee freedom of the arts in Europe.
All right. Quite interesting. I'm looking at the time, but so I will move on to another topic that I know you work on and that I think is quite interesting, which is space policy. So actually, I read that you made your thesis on international space also. You've been a long time admirer of space, so could you tell us a bit about what the EU is doing in space or what it should do?
Currently, we are the leading nation in Earth observation. We are also I think second biggest spender after NASA. The combination of our national space organizations and ESA together, they have the biggest investment in space endeavors. So a lot of times we undervalue what the European Union or Europe in general does in parts of space. But at the moment, especially, there's this trend. I mean, you probably saw that Jeff Bezos had his giant penis rocket that went to space, and they have this like space race 2.0. And this is really something that's happening. This is just the tip of the iceberg with the billionaires going to space, because beyond that, there's Starlink, there's a lot of smaller satellite companies. The number of satellites is growing constantly, and there's a whole industry dedicated to it, and we are not ready for it. So we have to change the way we are using space at the moment. And currently, the responsible commissioner, Breton, proposed two ideas, which is the connectivity strategy as well as the STM, which is the space traffic management. One of them would be a super constellation that ensures that we have internet throughout Europe via satellite, and the other one is so basically a Starlink, just hopefully better. And the other one is as STM, so space traffic management, which just means that we know which objects are where, and we know where the whole trash is, because trash in the space is very dangerous, because even a small bolt because they're traveling so fast. If that hits a satellite, it has the explosion. It's like a hand grenade. And so it's very dangerous. So you have to exactly know where what is, so that you don't lose your satellites.
Yeah, I do remember. I knew the thing about the trash in space, because in the movie Gravity, there is a scene where there is trash that destroys everything. So it's quite impressive indeed to see the small bolt destroying an entire satellite. And speaking of space garbage, space trash, last week Commissioner Breton actually complained about the situation because Russia had made a test with an anti-satellite weapon that exploded one of its satellites through thousands of new garbage in space. And so the Breton was saying that it was irresponsible kind of action, because it was making space more dangerous for the others, because they could, Russia is entitled to destroy its own satellites, but then the debris might destroy European satellites, American satellites, etc., 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 etc. And my question then would be, beyond localizing the trash in space, can we do anything about it apart from knowing where it is? Is there any way to get rid of it?
Not yet.
Not yet.
So this is the big problem. Yeah, there's a mission from ESA to explore exactly how to get rid of it. So if like this satellite that has been blown up was a satellite that was in a low Earth orbit. So there are three stages of orbits. There's the low one, the middle, and the very high one. And the lowest one, if you shoot something down there, it's not so dangerous. It is dangerous, and it is irresponsible that they did it. But if we avoid this trash, then in a few years it will fall down to Earth and just evaporize in the atmosphere. So it's not completely everything is lost. But I also want to mention that it's not just Russia who did it, right? I mean, this time Russia blew it up just to show, hey, we can blow it up. So, we can also blow your stuff up, which is good to know. But it also has been performed by India, it has been performed by China, it has been performed by the US. It has not yet been performed by the European Union, and I hope that we're smart enough to not perform it because it is so dangerous. And that brings me to the other point. Why even perform it? Because if we would have a space war or Star Wars, whatever you want to call it, and anybody blows up the relevant satellites, like the like the communication satellites, those are the big ones in the highest in the in the highest orbit. If you destroy them and they blow up, and you have to destroy not just one but maybe 10 to really disrupt the signal, then the whole orbits will be unusable. So you don't just destroy your enemy's satellite, but also your own ones in the end. Maybe it will take like 2 or 3 months until they are completely destroyed, but then everything is destroyed and all the orbits are unusable, and even more, we will not have the chance to go out into space again for the next around 3,000 years or something like that, because every rocket that you shoot up there will be destroyed by trash. And so it's very, very dangerous what they're doing there, and we need to find ways to get rid of all the debris that we already have, because there are a ton of dead satellites that are not functioning anymore. There's a lot of smaller debris that have already been destroyed in previous missions or anything like that. And in order to get rid of that, that's actually the key on how that we have to work on at the moment. That's the more difficult stuff. Basically, they're like I say that they're trying to show the world how nice they can shoot down stuff, but the more difficult task, like blowing stuff up, is very easy for everybody. But the more difficult task is to safely bring it down without destroying anything. And of course, that's also usable for, and even more interesting usable for warfare. Because if you can bring down trash, you can of course also bring down a bigger satellite of your enemy. And I think the only possibility to work on it in general is to work on it together with all the nations, because then we know what the others are doing. And we have basically one organization that is just, collecting all the trash, and it's not collecting enemy satellites at the same time.
And beyond this satellite trash in space, what do you see as an important stake for the EU space policy?
The most important thing that we have to do in the next time is actually to constitute a European space law. Every nation has the possibility to give itself a space law, and most of them did not. So there's just a handful of space laws worldwide, and they're all incoherent. So there's a lot of stuff missing. But if we want to continue with commercialization of space, then we need to have a space law and have certainty for the companies how much can they invest, how much security they have to bring forward, what the liabilities are, who can do what in space, who owns what in the end. The space in space is limited, so the space in the orbits that you can use is quite limited because there's so much trash and other stuff. And so they also have to pay for it because it's a necessity, a scarcity, and so I think they should pay for it, and we can then use the funding from that, for example, to reduce the trash. They have to follow rules that if your satellite is dying, they have to go back into orbit and destroy itself into the atmosphere. And so those are all the things that we need to solve in a European space law. And with that, we would really be one step ahead of everybody else in the world and could set new standards for the world and for the exploration of space.
All right. I'm looking at the time, so I will go into my two final questions, if you don't mind. So my first question would be, if you had three wishes, if you could change anything about the EU, anything, institution, the way of doing EU politics, what would you change and why?
I would make it a republic, a federal European republic, because I believe in which the parliament has more say than the council, because I believe we parliamentarians are directly elected. The council is indirectly elected, and so therefore shouldn't have as much power as the direct elected parliament. And we need to be more sticking together in a lot of issues, because if we are a common republic, I believe we would have way more weight in the world. We could influence a lot of stuff better, and we can solve problems way easier.
Well, actually, you anticipated my second question, which was, do you support a federal European Union? You do, since you want a European Republic, so you answered both my questions. That's perfect. Then I will ask a follow-up question on that. So you want a European Republic, which would, of course, require a lot of treaty change, European constitution, etc., etc. In terms of time, how long would it take for you to do this transition from what the EU is right now to maybe a European Republic, European Federation?
It depends on how afraid the current politicians are. If they are brave enough, we could do it within. We could start with it in May next year, because with the end of the Conference on the Future of Europe, the perfect outcome for that, I believe, would be that we have a convention where we write a constitution, because I think that's something that we're missing. And should not be a constitution in which some political leaders come together and discuss something, but something where we can really bring people together and everybody can think about what are the values that we are standing for, what is the basis on which our society can work together, and where do we want to be dependent on others, and where do we want to be self-reliant. And I believe that this discussion, if we do it honestly and even more than we did it now with the Conference on the Future of Europe, if we have this with the whole European society, I believe it needs to take time. It needs to take as much time as it needs. So I don't know if it takes 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, but I think that's the best way, because then everybody's on board. Because then nobody can say, I didn't know they were doing this or that, or I wasn't heard or anything. Like everybody's doing at the moment with the treaties. We didn't want this, we didn't want that. Yeah, well, it's always weird if only the government is deciding something and doesn't ask the people. But with the convention for constitution, I believe this could be solved, and then it could go quite quickly. If we go the long way and always change treaty here and there and a little bit, I don't know, maybe 50 years or something, but then it's just a waste of time, because we will end up there anyway. So why take the extra time? And by that time we will lose the connection to the other world powers. And I'm a little bit afraid of a world where just a Donald Trump or just a Vladimir Putin or just a Xi Jinping has the possibility to influence our behaviors and the world's direction.
Right, well, that's pretty clear. Thank you. So, to finish up with the interview, I would give you the opportunity to say a final word to the audience before we move on to the debriefing. So, the floor is yours to speak, to say your final words. Go ahead.
Oh, I said so many words already. I don't have any final ones to do. I'm sorry. I'm really a little bit tired now, because it was quite a long day in Strasbourg. It was very fun to be here. I hope the chat had. I saw there was nice, interesting facts in the chat. I didn't see too many smileys yet or emojis, so you can go ahead with that and have fun with the debriefing.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mr. Nienass, for your time. Chat, make sure to thank him. You can follow him on his Twitter account. You see is at under the video feed. And without further ado, well, let's start the debriefing. Mr. Nienass, thank you very much. Have a good evening and a good Strasbourg, and hopefully, maybe we'll see you on the channel in the future. Have a good evening. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye.
All right, guys. Let's do that. If I do any more, Nightbot will ban you. Well, actually, I changed the rules. Now you can do up to 10. So as long as you don't spam 10, that's fine. Let me just leave Zoom, and then we'll be able to start the debrief. All right. So, oh yeah, you're happy. And now you're gonna spam 11 of them, and you get banned, and you won't be able to complain because I will have warned you. Anyway. Let's dive into this. So yeah, the interview was nice. We covered quite a few topics that we didn't touch upon in the past. I don't think we ever talked about the regional funds or culture. So it was refreshing for once we didn't speak about energy or environment, even if those are very important topics. But well, we discussed new stuff. New stuff is always good. So what did I have on my trusty notebook? So first thing we discussed was how it felt to be a young MEP in the European Parliament. So he said that, well, for him it went fine. People were not disrespectful of him or anything. He just had to prove his worth, so to say, to the colleagues, especially since he was a coordinator. So the coordinator is a quite important position among MEPs, because the coordinators are the, how can I say it? They're the head of the political group within each committee. So he's the coordinator in the regional fund committee. So that means that all the Greens, he's leading the Green MEPs inside that committee. So it's an important position. He gives him quite a lot of power. So usually these positions are given to people who matter. So that's why he probably had to do quite quickly his show that what he's made of, and show that he could be trusted and someone who could be worked with, and worked out for him. Good for him. But I asked the question because I've heard, like, especially during the last mandate, a few stories about like, for instance, like young MEPs who get stopped at the entrance by the security, especially at the beginning of the mandate, where the security does not know yet who is who. They stop the people at the entrance. Say, "Who are you? Are you an intern? You need to take the other entrance." And the person is like, "Well, no, actually, I'm an MEP. I can enter. I'm not an intern." So yeah, there was quite a few stories like that. So that's why I was asking if there were any improvement on that front, which seems to be the case. Then we had an interesting conversation on which initially I wanted to do at the end of the interview, but we did at the beginning, which was perfectly fine by me because it was an interesting conversation. Was about the fact that the EU politics is boring to watch, and we discussed a lot about plenaries, because he's in Strasbourg, so in the plenary session is supposed to be like the moment in European Parliament politics. So that's where everyone is there. That's where they have the vote. So that's what's supposed to be the most interesting to watch for citizens. What's happening in the parliament. I think Ikaos at some point made a reference to the House of Commons. Yeah, in there. Let's go back down. So yeah, here it's interesting because something that you often see. He mentioned this when he mentioned the sitting closer. Actually, fun fact: the House of Commons actually does not have enough room for all the MPs. There is not enough seat for all the MPs, and that was voluntary. I remember like a former British colleague explaining to me that after World War II, there was a rise in the number of MPs, and they need to do renovation in the House of Commons, and Churchill specifically asked to have a smaller House of Commons so that not everyone could be in the room, that people would be cramped. And he did that voluntarily to say, oh yeah, let them be cramped, that will make them lively, that will make them focus. So that I always thought that was a funny bit of history when it comes to the House of Commons. But anyway, we're not talking about the House of Commons, we're talking about the European Parliament. Something that we often see, unfortunately, on TV, etc., is indeed when people are in the plenary, most of the time the plenary is empty. You will see like maybe a dozen, 20, 30 people in this huge room that has 800 seats, and it gives the impression, oh well, MEPs are actually not working. It's only a few people who are talking, etc., etc. And the problem here is that it gives the wrong impression. It gives the impression that MEPs are working, which, well, in fact, they do work. I mean, a Strasbourg session are usually extremely intense. It's very, very exhausting for everyone, whether the MEP or the staff, because MEPs do not have other stuff to do than to sit in the plenary. They have meetings, they have committee meetings, they have 10,000 things happening at the same time, so they can't always be in the plenary. And also, it reflects the way, after spending days watching now, so communities stop giving Europart the same chance, it didn't work. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I do not watch plenary streams unless I'm forced to. Let's be clear, and that's my job. Part of my job is to follow that, and I don't do it unless I'm forced to. Unless I have to. Why? Because he said it already, but let's start the beginning. Why are there only a limited amount of people? And why is there in the plenary meetings 10 to 50 people instead of 700? Because actually the way the parliament works, European politics works, it's a very technical work. European politics, European policy work is very technical, and it's a matter of specialists. That means that on most files very technical, so only a handful of people will actually work on it, the specialists. And when they go to the plenary, well, actually the files, you go to the plenary, you go to a debate only if you are interested in debate. Otherwise, there is no point in you sitting in the hemicycle, looking on Twitter, sending a message while people are talking about stuff that you don't understand, that you don't actually care about because you're working on something else. So that's why you only have always have very limited people in the plenary for debates and all that, because only a limited amount of people are actually working on each file. They are the specialists. They are the ones who matter in on the topic, and the other MEPs will follow the specialists of their own group on that when the time of the vote comes. So that's the first reason why you don't have a lot of people in the plenary. That doesn't mean that they're not working or they're not interested. It's just that they have other stuff to do at the same time, and the European policy is a matter of specialists. Second thing that he discussed is that, well, it gives it's kind of weird that you can't sit next to each other. So he mentioned that people should be all at the front of the hemicycle so that people are closer together. I mean, that would not solve the fact that still it's 50 people in a room that is supposed to have 800 people that can at least host up to 800 people if I recall correctly. But yeah, at least it gives the impression that there is something happening. It's foster kind of debate, and yeah, of course, that's also something I always found absurd: the fact that you MEPs have to speak from their desk and do not go to the podium at the center. I mean, that's something that you see in every single parliament in the world. People go to the podium and speak from the podium. For whatever reason, the parliament was not doing that. Hopefully, that's something that will stay after COVID, because now under COVID, now when they are speeches, they have to go to the podium. So hopefully that will stay in the future. I had something interesting to say about it, and I forgot, so it will probably come back at a later point. In the meantime, let's move on. No, I was about to have something. Oh yeah, I know what I wanted to say. Why is it boring? Because, like you mentioned, what they call debates are in fact not debates. They are a series of statements. People are not talking to each other. They're just doing their statements for their social media, for the national media, etc., etc. But they're not. It's not a debate. They call that a debate. It's not a debate in 90% of the case, which makes it extremely boring to watch, because in the same debate, people will end up saying exactly the same thing, more or less. And so usually the thing that you do is that you watch the beginning and the end of a debate, because the beginning of the end is when the important people are supposed to speak. So the commission, the council, the rapporteur, the shadow rapporteurs, etc. So those are more or less like the the 10 first speakers, and then at the then you can skip the rest because it's any other MEP who wants to speak. Good for them, but most of them it's not a debate. And then the very end, when you have the commission and the council and the rapporteur answering giving the closing statements. Those are the bits that are interesting, but unfortunately not really the rest because it's not a debate. And he mentioned what he is called the blue card. The blue card is literally a blue card that the MEP can use when there is a discussion in the plenary. Whenever Dane arrives, I go, there's a niche national debate, you're parroting the mistake. Yeah, I mean, it's not only the Danes, it's everyone. Everyone is using that. They use that as to do a video. That way they can put on their social media the video of them speaking in the plenary doing their speech. The speech that can be like perfectly related to that is perfectly related to the topic. I mean, that's not the issue. It's just they're doing their own personal communication. They're not taking part to a debate in the European Parliament. But that's the way it's designed. That's the way it's designed. Unfortunately, people are talking past each other. And the blue card is one way, in fact, for an MEP to pop in. So let's say you make a statement, you make your contribution in debate. Another MEP can raise the blue card to say, I want to answer to what this person just said in the plenary. The president of the parliament or the vice president will see that, will maybe grant the blue card, say, okay, we have time, so we can do a blue card. And we'll ask the person who did initially the speech, do you accept to answer the blue card? And then the person could say, no, I don't want to answer. I can answer. So, but it's like two statements where they answer to each other. But that's it. That's all they can do. It's not a proper debate. Far from it, and that makes the whole thing rather boring and very technical in the end. We're very far from the images that you see in the House of Commons to take the exact opposite point. What did I have on my piece of paper? So I covered that. He talked a bit about the translation and interpretation, which is indeed can be a problem. Because I mean, if you watch the plenary debates, you know that already. Sometimes there is stuff that they get lost in translation. Sometimes the people speak too fast, so the interpreter cannot follow. So you're missing actually bits of the parts of the actual intervention. And sometimes you listen, you're like, I have no clue what the person actually said. I don't understand really what was the point, and you're missing the subtlety. It's not the fault of the interpreter, far from it. It's just the problem of being in a parliament where you speak 24 different languages start to get lost in translation, and that of course makes things more complicated to have an actual debate, because if you don't understand what the person is saying, well, it's hard to have an exchange of views that is meaningful. Very chaotic even when the president reads the script, because the thing is, in theory, so the interpreters are there, they interpret what the MEPs or what the presidents are saying on the spot. But they do that on the spot. But MEPs can, and usually they are encouraged to do so, even if in many cases they do not. How can I say it? They have the possibility to send in advance their speech to the interpreters, so that the interpreter can already pre-translate the speech, so that when the MEP is speaking, the interpreter already has a script. He knows what the person is going to speak about, and he's gonna adapt a bit to what the MEP is saying on the go that is different from the script. But still, he has the actual script. He has the proper translation that he can make without having to improvise and lose part of it. But in practice, very few MEPs do it because it's because they don't have time most of the time. They see it's kind of a bother to do it. I'd rather. Most MEPs don't care about how the speech is translated. They just say it in their own language, speaking for their national media. They don't really care about, well, how is it is translated. So no one will send the speech in advance to the interpretation, especially since sometimes MEPs can be improvising. Sometimes the speech itself was done like 5 minutes before going to plenary, so there is literally no time, that sort of thing. So that makes that participate to the all problems with translations. Moving on from that, what did we have in there? I'm looking at the time as well. Try to be quick about it because it's getting late. We talked about the cohesion policy, said that it's working well to in a way to maintain a bit the level and to prevent one region to fall too far behind the others. But he's saying that it's not yet successful in allowing these regions to catch up. Which, I mean, yes and no. If you look at prior to the extension to the east, you had seen like in the past, like if you take Spain, if you take Portugal, if you take Italy, even Greece to an extent, these regions were very poor, and the cohesion fund really helped them catch up quite a bit. It's now just like the wave of new member states in the east in 2004. Let's say the gap in terms of wealth was way bigger, so it takes more time to for these regions to catch up. They didn't have infrastructure, etc., etc. So it's much more complicated to do. Skipping through some stuff. Yeah, we'll talk about the idea of actually cutting funds to the regions that are in country involved into rule of law problems that have co-signed that have installed LGBT-free zones, that sort of stuff. So that stuff we saw notably in Poland, but not only. And we had the discussion whether it was a good idea to cut the funds. And indeed, he mentioned the other part of the debate that said, yeah, but actually by cutting this fund, you're hurting people who need the fund and who are completely unrelated to what the government is actually saying. So they're saying, yeah, you're punishing regions, you're punishing people for something that they're not responsible for. Although the pressure, the threat to cut the funds can be effective, because in the case of the LGBT-free zones, the Commission actually openly told this region, if you maintain those, you will not get funds. And there are many regions that had taken these resolutions, moved away from it and cancelled these things so that they could benefit from the EU funds in the future. So it's kind of a difficult balance to find. The particular also say about urging LGBT people depending on funding of the arts. That's a very specific example that he took. But yeah, that's one example on the idea that some people rely on these funds because they can't get the national funds, or they have nothing to do with the government. Even if he took a very specific example to like say the extreme example of these people who need these EU funds because they won't get anything else. What else do I have on my little list? I noted that I need to check the budget for Creative Europe programs, the program for culture. He answered the question. It's very small. It's 0.1% of the budget, if I'm not mistaken. So that's literally peanut. And yet we found some nice video games. Chaos worked on one, and we saw already quite a bit on the channel. But it goes way beyond. I've done video games, but it's movies, music, theater, painting, whatever you want in terms of art that can fall within. But the funds there is not enough money for the amount of people in there. You heard it, 70% or 80% of people get their project rejected, not because the project is bad, but because there's simply not enough money to go around. He did an interesting bit about the impact of COVID on culture, which indeed was quite dramatic, especially during the first year. I mean, you all remember back then, like everything was closed: theaters, movie theaters, bookshops, that sort of thing. Everything was closed, and that was pretty dramatic for a number of sectors. And I mean, they're still not fully recovered. I don't know about you, but I haven't been to a concert in quite some time. COVID. What else did I? Oh yeah, he also mentioned something that I know about, which is the fact that on creative sector stuff, that's a lot of cultural projects need EU funds because not all cultural projects are blockbusters. Far from it. I mean, I remember from from back when, since I worked on culture, like in the in movie sector, for instance, like out of 10 movie projects, 9 will not generate any kind of profit. Like 2 will break even, and 6 or 7 will actually lose money. So that's most cultural projects actually are done at a loss of money, and that's the way these the cultural sectors work, and that's why you have a all system subvention. That's why you need copyright and etc etc. Each year, the funds have particular political requirement that your vision might not overlap with. Yeah, especially in some countries, indeed. And what else can I tell you before we close up? Space. EU in space. I didn't know. I knew that we were strong when it comes to space observation, but apparently we are leading. So that's quite good. That's quite good, especially since we did the all. Oh no, not Glasnost. That's the Russian project. Galileo. Galileo is the European GPS project, which is actually quite successful. It's I think one of the most, or if not the most precise GPS is a geolocalization system in the world, and the EU was quite keen of doing that to stop being dependent on the US system, especially when it comes to defense and that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had on my notes. If you have questions or comments, now is the time. Otherwise, I will start my conclusion. In the meantime, close up this. Oh, yeah, well, just Nightbot. That's another question. Okay, so let's do the conclusion. So, thank you for being there. I hope you found the interview interesting. Definitely enjoyed it. It was especially since it was topics that we did not discuss about in the past, and we also talked a bit about the backstage about of how EU politics is done, what makes it interesting or not interesting. So that was a refreshing topics, definitely. So, and yeah, again, I'm very grateful that he made himself available on such a short notice. I mean, literally, I sent a shout out on Twitter yesterday afternoon saying, "Oh well, is anyone available?" And the office reached out to me, say, "Okay, yeah, we can do it. Let us know how it works." So we dodged a bullet on this one, and I'm very grateful to him. Next time it's gonna be on Sunday for the news review, as usual, at 6 in French and at 8 in English. As usual, if you enjoy what you saw, don't hesitate to give me a follow on the channel. That's always helpful. Or if you feel mighty generous, to even subscribe. I'm putting in the chat my other social media so that you can go on my Twitter and my Discord, join us there. It's a lot of fun. And on this note, well, I wish you all a good evening, and I will see you soon. Bye, everyone.